We're excited to talk about this topic because I have a feeling a lot of us have a lot of pain points around these folks that drive us absolutely crazy. And in fact, some of us, even as we were working on this project together, were thinking, I bet there's some times when I've even shown up as a toxic employee, inadvertently, I'd love to say, and many of us have those marks on our forehead from banging it up against the wall over and over again, wishing these employees would wake up tomorrow being new and improved, and sure enough, it's the same old the next day. So we've got some absolute fun, fabulous techniques that'll help you get through that. So let's walk through the agenda that we've got going for today, and we're going to be moving quickly, and it's going to be interactive. So today we'll be talking about, introducing who we are at Fierce and a little bit about myself. We're going to be looking at a toxicity stats that we created. We created a survey, and so we've really looked at over 1,000 executives and employees in organizations all across the country that really weighed in to let us know where their pain points are around toxic employees. And then we're going to look at what creates a toxic employee, and then how to handle them and how to help move past that and actually give feedback, or if you need to, confront those employees. So who am I? I am Amy Windmiller Wood, as Andrew said, and I have over 16 years of learning and development experience, including some time working as a regional HR director for Macy's department stores. So I have a lot of experience with employees who do one thing, say one thing, do another, and show up in, unfortunately, really painful ways for their colleagues and their bosses, and even many times for their customers. So one thing that I really want to introduce to you that drew me to work for this company, Fierce Incorporated, and that is this quote that you see right in front of you. It was so moving for me that it really started me to explore the partnership that I have with Fierce right now, and then to come on board on the team and head up their training function. So while no single conversation is guaranteed to change the trajectory of a career, a company, a relationship, or a life, any single conversation can. And I think we can all think back to those conversations that, had we not paid attention in the moment, had we not been mindful and heard what that person was trying to say to us, that we could be on a different trajectory right now, a different path, and have a different experience. So I think it's important to be mindful and to pay attention to the conversations as they occur for you and think, is this something that I need to pay attention to? And when you think about a toxic employee, I believe there are a lot of conversations that are trying to be had with that person that they are ignoring and disregarding, that's taking them in a different trajectory for themselves. So some of the programs that we have at Fierce, this is really a fantastic suite of programs for leadership and development, for employee development, for high potentials, and we teach the art of conversation. We teach a conversation program called Team Conversations, which is really about creating an environment where we can help make the best possible decision for the organization, get to the heart of the matter, and allow for what I love to refer to as frictionless debate. So we create a really collaborative conversation model. We have one-on-one coaching model. We have a delegation conversation that really explores how can I use this as a tool to develop my team. We also have a feedback conversation model, and we're really going to be focusing on the confrontation conversation today. In addition, we have a Fierce in the Schools program, so we work with not only with teachers and administrators, but with students in schools to help start these skill sets at an early age in order to really move people forward and change the world one conversation at a time. So let's take a look at who this toxic employee is. I mean, what's the makeup of this person? I mean, oftentimes they have negative attitudes, their behaviors, they give people cold shoulders, they roll their eyes, it's all about them. So there's a lot of ways this employee shows up in the workplace. One thing we know for sure is if this employee goes unchecked, it can have an extremely detrimental effect in the workplace for all those folks who work around them. And even it can have a negative downward spiral for others who work around them, who start to, in a sense, notch down their performance or check out. So who are the toxic employees? We had some fun naming some of these. Some of these will sound familiar, but I believe that you will probably have a visual in your mind of each one of these folks that you've encountered through your life. They may not be with these same exact names, but I'm sure you'll flash on them as you think about it. And so we've got Debbie Downer. This employee always seems to have a dark cloud over their head. They unfortunately don't have enough energy to actually be the devil's advocate. They just sort of shuffle along and complain about things. We've got manipulative Mark, who basically tries to get people to do what he wants them to do and takes all the credit after they've accomplished it. And then we've got negative Nellie, critical Christy, never wrong Nick. I'm sure you know exactly who we're talking about here. So let me ask you this. We're going to do our first poll here. What impact do they have on the workplace? So Andrew, go ahead and pop up our Poll Everywhere poll here. I'd love to hear some of your feedback. What impact have you seen from toxic employees in the workplace?
HCI members, if you could,
here we go.
Take a moment and type in your response. So we've got uptight, reduced production, a negative vibe for employees. I think the first thing that came to my mind was like, people are walking on eggshells around these folks because it's like you just don't want to set them off. But what are you seeing as these come in? As these come in, Amy, what are some of these things that seem to stand out for you?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like they're creating time sucks for people. They're sucking up a lot of time. And I think part of that comes because we have workarounds we create for trying to avoid this person, tiptoeing around them, like you said, walking on eggshells. People are uptight. They're very negative. Their attitudes affect things, and it really poisons the well, so to speak, with the folks around them. And oftentimes, because we're dealing with them, we start to create our own triangulation and our own victim bonding because we're having to put up with this toxic employee. So it definitely takes some time. So thank you. I appreciate everyone weighing in on this. This is great. Great comments here. They create a negative work environment. It really comes down to that, and it's pretty simple and straightforward. So let's take a quick overview of our survey results here. So we, as I said earlier, we surveyed over 1,000 employees and executives in so many different organizations, from healthcare to education to manufacturing to financial sector, and really it comes down to 78% of employees say that negative attitudes are extremely debilitating to team morale. Extremely debilitating, not just slightly debilitating, but extremely. And 17% say negative attitudes increase stress, and 27% of employees said that negative attitudes decrease productivity. I think it comes back to what you all identified, which is that negative environment creates workarounds. We're tiptoeing around. We're trying to avoid these employees. So this is part of what we came up with, was really just looking at how that affects totally increasing our stress, totally increasing our distractions, and basically imagine how much time that takes away from actually getting real work done on the job. So another thing that we discovered was 62% of employees opt to confront toxic coworkers. 62% say, you know what, I have to have this conversation with them. Good for them. I think that's fantastic. And 78% of employees claim that their organizations are extremely to somewhat tolerant of colleagues with negative attitudes. So they're thinking, hey, look, I'm taking care of the problem. How come the organization doesn't seem to be addressing this problem? And sometimes I think this is because these toxic employees are often high performers. So not everybody's shuffling around not doing their job. They are, staking their claim, doing what needs to be done, and we think, oh, gee, if I say something to this person, they're the top salesperson on my team. If I address that, they're going to stop producing, and I really can't afford to lose those numbers right now. So I think that's some of the dynamic that happens that appears to not why the organization's not addressing these folks. So here's some quotes that I love. We encountered this one, and this one just makes me laugh. The day this person left our company is considered an annual holiday. And I think sometimes that's what we feel like. And Jim Collins has a great quote, which is great vision without great people is irrelevant. So we can have all the vision we want, but if we've got some toxic employees on our team, we are not going to be the best we can be. So this is a recipe for disaster, not addressing these employees, not having an environment where we can have the conversations, and good for the 62% that are addressing it. So let's look at how can even more of us, so that we're not just looking at 62% of the people addressing it, but 100% of the people addressing this. So let's take a look at some of the factors that can happen when we're not addressing it is we create an environment where people are disengaged. So a Gallup poll says 63% of employees are unengaged and 24% are not only just unengaged but actively disengaged, making up 87% of the global workforce. That is sad. That's a sad statistic right now, and it's amazing to think, part of that might be because I don't feel like I belong to my organization, and I feel like I'm surrounded with some pretty negative employees who aren't happy to be there. Factor number 2 that we've encountered is people feel overworked. 42% of working adults are willing to give up some percentage of their salary just for more flexibility at work. I think that's really key there, and that comes from Business News Daily. So another factor, stress. 80% of workers feel stress on the job, and nearly half say that they need help learning how to manage that stress. 29% of these employees have actually yelled at coworkers because of workplace stress. So is that what's causing these toxic employees? I think that might be. So if I'm sitting here feeling stressed out, first, I could either show up as a toxic employee because of my stress, or on the other hand, I may be a toxic employee. I may be affected by a toxic employee, which is causing me stress. So that's another factor there, is stress is really high. And we identified that in our survey as well. And factor number 4, employees feel undervalued. So we created a great white paper called The 6 Key Trends That Increase Employee Productivity and Engagement. And 98% of the respondents believe that exploring other points of view improved decisions. Yet only 49% felt that their organizations encouraged them to do so. You can download that white paper when you visit our website. It's really a great white paper. It talks about diverse points of view, improved decision-making, cross-functional alignment is critical to this. So we really looked at that from lots of different directions on how to help create a more productive and engaged workforce. So let's do another poll here. So what do you think? What trend do you see the most when you're thinking about an environment where there's some toxic employees? What do you think you're seeing? Disengagement, overwork, stressed, undervalued? Let's weigh in here. If you can pop that poll up, Andrew, that would be great. Thank you. All right. So it looks like we've got a lot of stress being created. 45% of you so far are saying stressed. Let's see how it changes and shifts here. Disengagement. One of the things that we look at when we're looking at engagement as well is, if I have a healthier work environment, if I'm given really fun, exciting work to do, my engagement level naturally goes up. I'm excited to bound out of bed, throw my shoes on, jog into work and get the work done. And my stress level goes down if I feel like I belong there, like I have a voice, like I'm being heard. So 40%, it's going up, but it looks like disengagement and stress are exactly what we found in our survey as well. So thank you for weighing in. Let's go ahead and move forward. All right, so let's take a look at what are some of the tools and ideas we have to help solve this. I really want to delve into this a little bit deeper here. So we have 7 principles at Fierce Conversation, which are really the cornerstones of how to have this conversation. And we also have some conversation models that we'll explore. The first and the principle that I really want to focus on right now is taking responsibility for your emotional wake. So think about the wake that we leave behind in conversations as a ripple effect behind us. So how do people feel about our conversations when they leave the room? So a toxic employee often leaves an incredibly powerful and toxic wake behind them. People feel worse after the conversation's over rather than better after the conversation's over. And so sometimes when we are not mindful, when we're focused on our own stress level, on our own disengagement, we ourselves could become toxic employees simply because of that stress and because of that disengagement. So if I find that I did leave awake, did I leave an afterglow? Are people actually feeling great? An aftermath or an after effect? So what is that? What happens when I leave this conversation, and how am I feeling about that? And toxic employees can actually leave a tsunami in their wake. So let's take a look at two of the ways that we look at dealing with these toxic employees. The first is very simple. We can give feedback, and we can learn how to receive feedback on the spot to create awareness. So if I have an interaction with a toxic employee and it doesn't go well, I can call it out. You know, I can, if somebody rolls their eyes in a meeting, I don't see why we can't say, hey, I noticed that you just rolled your eyes. Is there something going on there? Is there more you need to tell me about? What's happening with you right now? Are you not happy with this idea, this plan? Talk with me about that. So that we're giving feedback sometimes right there in the moment. I have found that when I have given feedback to a toxic employee after the fact, if too much time lags between the behavior and the actual feedback, they don't recall that they ever did it. And I think they could pass a lie detector test. They would say, you know, I don't even know what you're talking about there. That did not happen that way. I don't do that. And yet, when we really address it right in the spot, they often realize, oh yeah, I did do that. That did happen. I was feeling this in the moment. And they can do a little bit of a self-assessment and check in the moment to say where they're at. So we want to focus on giving and receiving on-the-spot feedback. The next thing is oftentimes, especially with toxic employees who have gone unchecked for a long time and that are really creating a negative environment, we need to dig deeper and we need to have a deeper conversation. And we would call that our confrontation conversation. So how do we address them and confront this behavior in order to create an environment of behavior change? So let's think about, though, going back to feedback, how do we feel about giving and receiving feedback? How do you feel about giving and receiving feedback? Andrew, is there a poll for this? I apologize for not knowing.
No, not at the time. Not at this time. Sorry, I didn't realize this was supposed to be a poll.
Right. No worries. We have created this with a poll with some other things we do. So that was my question for you, and I should have asked you that earlier. So one of the things, though, we have done when we've done our own poll everywhere for giving and receiving feedback is we really check and weigh, how do you feel about giving feedback? Do you love it? And when we think about giving feedback to a toxic employee specifically, do you love it or do you loathe it? And I would say most of us, from the evidence that we've gathered, tend to lean a little bit more towards the loathe it side. I'm not that fond of giving feedback. Now, I think there are a handful of us who say, you know what, it's part of the job, I've got to get it done. I'm more towards the love it end of the scale just because I see the problem get solved quickly and I nip it in the bud. And most of us tend to be over the, why do I have to do this? Why can't they just be a new and different person and show up tomorrow in a different way? So part of what we score here is, how do you feel about giving constructive feedback? And how do you feel about receiving constructive feedback? So I think it's a really important thing to ask yourself, and is there a difference between giving and receiving feedback? So, how do you feel and what's the difference? To me, that gap between go ahead, bring it on, I can handle it, and no, I don't really want to give it, that's significant. And I think that's something to really check within yourself. I feel comfortable receiving it, but I don't think others do. So when I'm teaching the confrontation section in class, and I'm, polling the students right there in front of them, oftentimes I'll ask, on a scale of 1 to 10, If your behavior was driving someone crazy, if your behavior was the toxic behavior, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being la 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 with your ears plugged, I don't want to know, I don't want to, don't tell me, I want to live in the dark, and 10 being bring it on, let me know, most of the time people's numbers that they holler out in class are 7, 8, 9, and 10, and most are 9 and 10. If my behavior was driving somebody crazy, I would want to know. And yet, when it comes to actually confronting people that they've identified as toxic, that they've identified that definitely need to have behavior changes, they think, I'm about a 3, 4, 5. I'm not really confronting as often as I should, and I kind of try to avoid those conversations instead. And I think that's really key to say, isn't it interesting that we think bring it on for us, but yet we don't feel that people feel the same way about receiving constructive feedback. So, everybody wants it, so to speak, but we just don't know how to give it, and we don't feel comfortable giving it. So let's take a look at how do you determine whether or not this is a situation where I should give feedback or a situation where I should just simply confront this behavior. So we've got a few little slides here that'll give you what we see as the difference between those. So for example, in a feedback situation, it never happened before, and I don't think they were even aware that they did it. So this is maybe a one-time toxic employee. They show up, they're in a bad mood, boy, they sort of dumped on the team a little bit, but you've never seen it happen before. Then I would just give them feedback so that they have an awareness. Feedback is really important. If I could give people one gift, it would be the gift to observe themselves without knowing who they're watching for like a week. So that when I then say, hey, by the way, you were watching yourself, there'd be, I think, some big ahas. We don't get to see how our face shows up. We don't get to necessarily even digest or hear our tone of voice and how we come across to others. And I think that would be a huge insight. In this same situation, in confrontation, the opposite is there's a pattern of similar behavior. I've said something and nothing is changing, or it's not changing quickly enough. The next one, they did a great thing, and I want to make sure that they know how impactful it was for me, or the team, the organization. And I want to pause here for a second, because when we think about feedback, we often think, I've got to tell them what they're doing wrong. And we would contend at Fierce, you should be having lots of conversations that are talking about how wonderful they're showing up. I love how you did this, being specific, really getting into the heart of it. When you do that, we start to create a feedback-rich environment where people aren't expecting all the feedback to be negative or corrective. The opposite side of this is they did something that is troublesome to me or the team or the organization, and it really shouldn't happen again. So this is where we start to up the ante. The next one is I see a pattern that could become a problem later on for this person, and I feel compelled to share it with them so that they have an opportunity to course correct it. And the opposite is this individual has done something, and once is too much. So if this toxic employee has really shown up in a bad way, created, wreaked havoc, so to speak, on the organization, I have got to address it. The next one is, it's happened once. It's not necessarily an expectation that they change, but, maybe I just want to make sure they see it from my perspective. This might be more in that gray area. I'm not sure if this was toxic or not. It didn't sit right with me, but I really want to make sure that they hear my perspective here. And the opposite is it keeps happening, and now it's really affecting our relationship, our ability to work effectively together, and/or our results. So these are really key areas to take a look at. And one last one, a mistake was made, and it's important to share insights that could have been done better. And finally, mistakes keep being made, and there's an underlying issue that needs to be corrected to prevent further unanticipated mistakes. So let's take a look at our confrontation model. So this is an image that represents our confrontation model, and I think it's really important. When you first look at it, you often think of confrontation as a skull and crossbones. It looks like a skull and crossbones at first glance, and we think, yep, that's what confrontation feels like to me. In fact, we use language like, I'm going to go toe-to-toe with him, head-to-head with her. We're going to duke this out, so to speak. And we go into this conversation armed and armored. I've got my shield, I've got my sword, and if I go in armed and armored, I will indeed get somebody defending themselves, or attacking me back. And we end up in a battle. And instead, I want you to look at this. It's really got a magnifying glass and a flashlight. And so instead of going into this conversation with the mindset, I'm going to conquer this problem, I'm going to attack this toxic employee, I'm going to tackle this, I want you to think about going into it with an explorer mindset. I want to go into this conversation wanting to explore. And in fact, we look at confrontation as a search for the truth. In Spanish, con is with, and I want to be with you in front of this issue, searching for the truth. I want to stand side by side with you, shoulder to shoulder, shining my flashlight on the issue, taking a look at all the details with my magnifying glass so that we can fully understand each other and come to an agreement and an understanding together. So let's take a look at our confrontation model. I'm going to walk through all the steps with you, and you'll be able to have these as a takeaway when you download the slides. But what we do first is we really look at how do I want to begin this conversation, and I think that's key. If we go in winging this conversation, you are in danger of putting all sorts of lovely adjectives into your conversation and potentially coming across in an attacking way yourself. And you may be in danger of leaving an emotional wake, which we talked about earlier. So the first thing we want to do is really create an opening statement. And we call this our 60-second opening statement. So this should take no more than a minute. Now, that's not the duration of the conversation. This is just the very beginning. This is you sort of saying, this is my thoughts about the situation at hand right now, and then we open it up to a two-way conversation. But in this first 60 seconds, this is your opportunity to say how you perceive the situation and how it's impacted you and how it's impacted others in the organization. So the first thing you'll notice is step one is just to name the issue. You want to say, I want to talk with you about the effect your behavior, and you want to name the behavior a little bit more specifically, is having on whom? The team, the organization, me. So, for example, you may say, I want to talk with you about the effect your communication style is having on the team. Now, I like to use nice, big, broad subjects like communication style, work style, leadership style, simply because that opens it up for a lot of different interpretations. And you'll notice the very next step that we have, we're going to select a specific example that illustrates it. So you don't have to say, I want to talk with you about what happened yesterday in the meeting at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So you don't have to get into the nuances of it. You can actually give that example in the next sentence. So oftentimes toxic employees fall under attitude problems. You know, I need to talk with you about your poor attitude and the effect it's having on my innocent team. And instead of using that language, which will immediately get them on the defensive and feel like an attack on the receiving end, we want to say, I want to talk with you about your communication style and the effect it's having on the team. And then you might give an example. Yesterday, when Sharon started sharing her idea, you interrupted her and talked louder and changed the subject. So that would be an example that you could get. Now, when you're giving this example in step number 2, one of the things you really want to do is describe it like a video camera. You do not want to add any extra special adjectives here either. So you want to really just be clear as though a video camera had captured this. What did they see? And then the third step, and I think this is really important because this says, this has impacted me. I have some skin in the game on this. I'm feeling the effects of this behavior. So you want to describe your emotions around this issue. And I do want to call out that you want to describe them, not act them out. So we don't need to be pounding our fists on the table and, raising our voice and saying, I'm angry, or, I'm, frustrated with you. Instead, you want to just say, I'm frustrated, I'm upset, I'm concerned, I'm surprised. At one point when I had to confront an employee who was a toxic employee, their behavior had started to delay an entire process on the team. And this employee was showing up in a way that was not completing projects on time. And my whole team was starting to get calls from the CEO of the company saying, where is this project that you've committed to delivering? And I'd been trying to get this employee to do things, and I had an ownership in it as well, and we'll talk about that in a second. But ultimately, I was trying to get this employee to do what they were doing, and they were stalling and using a lot of excuses. And I remember I said, I'm frustrated and I'm embarrassed. You've embarrassed the team by not delivering this product on time. And I think it had an incredible amount of impact for this person because they realized it wasn't just about them. There was an effect, a ripple effect beyond them. Step 4 is where we have an opportunity to clarify why it's important. I think the why is often left out of conversations, especially confrontation conversations for employees. I have said it myself, statements like, why can't they just get this? Don't they know that their behavior is driving everyone crazy? How could anybody not see how crazy that is? And instead, let's not go there. Instead, we want to say, here's what's happening. This is why you changing this is important for the team, for the organization, for our relationship. And I think it's important to use the words at stake. Here's what's at stake. And you don't have to make it all negative either. It could be what's at stake to gain if we can correct this. What's at stake to lose for you, for others, for the team, for the organization if it's not corrected. Step number 5, you want to identify your contribution. So, for example, in the example with the employee who had not been doing her end of things and not turning her project in on time, I allowed it to happen. I saw a pattern starting to be established, and I didn't step in when I needed to as quickly as I needed to, and then had sort of my wake-up call when my phone rang and it was the CEO. So I took responsibility for part of that, but I also shared responsibility with this employee because it really was her project that she was spearheading. And as her leader, I probably should have been nudging her more. So if you have a contribution to the issue, you really need to name it. If you don't, trust me, the employee will tell you how you contributed when you turn it over to them. Number 6, indicate your wish to resolve this issue. So I want to pause here for a second. I really don't want you to use the 60-second opening statement as a 60-second closing statement and use this as a termination conversation. So this shouldn't be, and I really don't want to resolve this issue with you. Thank you very much. Instead, you really want to have the context that you really want to help get this issue resolved with this person and have your ideal outcome be that the behavior changes for the better, for them, for the team, and for the organization. And then last but not least, you really want to just simply invite them to respond. Help me understand what's going on from your perspective is really all you need to do there. So that's the 60-second opening statement. All of those 7 steps happen in 1 minute or less. Sometimes I get people asking, well, what if they interrupt me in the middle of this? The good news is, if it's really 1 minute or less, you can say this is going to just take less than a minute, and then I will be all ears and I want to turn it over to you. Because at that point, you will move it into turning it over to them. So oftentimes, especially with toxic employees, we've seen a pattern of behavior. We are stressed out about this. We have been preparing this mentally in our minds. Sometimes we even take this person home with us in our mind and set a place at the dinner table and complain about them yet again to our family or our friends and say, oh, you're never going to believe what this person did again today. And so we've been thinking about this toxic employee for a long time. They have had just about 60 seconds to realize there's a problem. After we've delivered our 60-second opening statement, they often go into the normal physiological reaction, which is fight or flight. The blood leaves their brains and goes into their arms and legs for fight or flight. And they are sitting there oftentimes either on the attack or maybe their body is presently sitting across from you, but their mind is somewhere else. And they can often go into 3 reactions. And the 3 most common that we see at Fierce are denial. They really, really don't see that they were a part of the problem. I didn't do it. It never happened. I don't know what you're talking about. It wasn't me. The second is defense. They say, you know what, I did do that, and you need to understand why I had to do what I had to do. And, they often point their fingers elsewhere in deflection and say, you know what, it's not about me, it's about them, you, the others. It's often that clever employee who says, you know what, are you having this conversation with Sally? Sally's way worse than I am. I mean, have you heard the way she talks to other people? I mean, talk about toxic. Sally's the most toxic one. And so we try to shine the spotlight off of ourselves and onto other people. The problem is not that these people go there. Just expect them to go there. They're going to be triggered. They will have less blood in their brains to have a conversation that's reasonable and rational. And really what you want to do instead is just not go there with them. So don't step into fighting. This is where having a really strong and clear and concise issue statement is helpful. So if I start trying to point my fingers elsewhere as the toxic employee who's being confronted, one of the best techniques you can use when you are the person doing the confronting is go back to step number 1 and restate that. So for example, if I started making excuses, you could say, Amy, we're here to talk about the effect your communication style is having on the team. Let's talk about that. So that you keep bringing it back when I change the subject. It allows you to have a method in place for you to stay calm and focused. And one of the best ways to help a person get untriggered is to ask them questions. That is a natural way to help engage their brain and let them know you need to be thinking of an answer now. So step number 8 in this process is really just getting curious, amazingly curious. This is not about arguing. This is not about selling your rightness and convincing them how wrong they are in their behavior, but absolutely going in with a curiosity mindset. Ask about their point of view. Help me understand is a great phrase you can use. Paraphrase, perception check. You want to really dig for full understanding here and not just be satisfied with the first answer that they say, but say, okay, so when you said that, what did you mean by that? And really dig and get curious. You want to lean in, especially if it's something that's very different from what you know the truth to be. Get curious about it. Find out. This is not about arguing with them about this. This is just finding out what their perspective looks like. Then once you feel like you've really explored that fully, you really want to move into the resolution. And sometimes, just so you know, especially if this person has been hardwired like this for a long time, change is not going to happen overnight. They may not even know how to proceed going forward. So the resolution may even need to be parked for a moment, and you may need to think, okay, I'll get back to this. We'll reconvene in the morning, and I want you to take the night to think about this. Let their brain calm down. Let them digest what you've said so that they can come in a little bit more reasonable, a little bit more rational to be able to have this conversation with you. So what was learned? Where are we now? What's needed for this resolution? This next question is one of my favorites. What was left unsaid that needs saying? Sometimes that prompts sort of that deeper dive in this conversation that allows them to say one more thing and to be able to explore that with you. And then finally, make a new agreement and have a method to hold each other able. We use that term holding each other able as an extension of trust to the other person. Instead of saying, I want to hold you accountable, which means I don't know for sure if you're actually going to honor your word and follow up with what your agreement is. And if that's the case, then you might want to check up on them and make sure. But why don't we have a conversation and say, you know what, if you've agreed to do that, I'm going to agree to do this. Let's figure out how we're going to check in with each other in a way that's respectful so that we can move forward together and improve the way we interact and work together. So let's do another poll. What do you think? When is it time to cut the cord? Andrew, let's go ahead and take this away. When's it time to cut the cord? Here we go. Thanks. We're loading it up right now. It's time to cut the cord when the conflict dominates the workforce. Absolutely. 90 days. I love that. Certainly if they're showing up in the first 90 days, cut that cord. Let's get them gone. Yes, absolutely. And sometimes, you know what, you can't tell on an interview how they're going to show up as a toxic employee. People are in their best, they have their best foot forward in that interview, so it's hard to tell. 6 months after 3 or 4 attempts to correct it. Yeah, I would agree. I think I think to expect immediate overnight change, you're going to have to look at what is the long-term damage effect. So I might want to be a little bit more gracious. And sometimes if this is really being a caustic environment and very toxic, we're going to need to cut the cord sooner. Yeah, so no behavior change, third time's the charm. I love these. The person shows, I missed that one, a lack of willingness to change, third notice, if change doesn't seem possible. And I've had this conversation with a toxic employee where they just said, I'm not willing to change. And that's an indication right there, and we parted ways. The person wasn't willing to step in and make the changes that needed to happen, and they realized it, we realized it, and we actually parted fairly amicably. So it can happen that way as well, that they realize, you know what, you're asking something of me that's not possible for me, and fair enough. After an opportunity, I love this. When the attitude shows no serious inclination to change, absolutely. When passive-aggressive behavior continues, love that. Thank you so much. These are great. I love this. So we're almost to the place where I have a few more things that are wrapping up, and then we'll get it into questions and answers, and I'll have a chance to field some of your answers that you have here. So some of the best practices that we've seen is really develop your feedback giving and receiving skills at all levels. And one of the things that makes our feedback program unique is we really focus on the importance of having a feedback-rich culture, one in which each and every person in this culture asks for feedback, not just gives feedback, but asks for it, especially the boss or the leaders of the organization. I think oftentimes when we're in an organization, the higher up you get, the more you are in a feedback vacuum. And somehow we can also start to tell ourselves that we're here at this title with this really fancy title in this big office because we've somehow arrived and we need no more feedback. And that's simply not true, as we know. So leaning in and as a leader especially saying, help me help you. How can I be more effective in how we interact together? Create a culture of feedback where everyone can receive it. Leverage feedback to stay current and remain curious. And when I say that, again, I want to emphasize it's also positive feedback, especially for a toxic employee. They're probably not completely all bad, and your good employees aren't all good. So where are they doing things well that we can continue to reinforce? And then confront when change is required. And in summary, toxic employees are a real issue in every organization. I think that's why you're here, because you all have them. We're all dealing with them. We want to figure out how to crack the code on helping solve this problem. And you have to have the conversation with these folks. Oftentimes, it's a big wake-up call, and you can see some pretty profound positive changes in your organization as the person starts to realize how they've impacted people around them, and build a culture of feedback where feedback is both asked for and received on a regular basis. So let's go ahead and turn this over for some questions. Andrew.
Amy, thank you so much. This has been really insightful, and I love a lot of the tips that you've given. I know they come in handy for a lot of the folks. The conversation on the chat has been phenomenal. Thank you, HCI members. You've done a great job of bringing up lots of tangential points that we can go to. So I think we'll go to a couple of these. Let's start off with some of the conversations that have been going on in the chat. But I will remind our members, if you haven't submitted a question, now is the appropriate time to do so, and we'll get to as many as we can in the time that we have left. But if we aren't able to do so, please attach your name to your comments so that we can follow up offline. So I think part of the conversation that's been going on in the chat is a little bit around some of the designations, and maybe you could help us, Amy, understand is labeling people toxic and labeling the conversations that you're having with these folks as confrontations. Is there some risk associated there? I mean, I think when I think of something toxic, and when you think about toxic removal, you picture people in hazmat suits, and it's like they basically take that to a faraway place and dump that, and nobody lives there for 25 years. So, I mean, tell me if we're off base here in labeling this, and maybe there's more HR friendly terms that we should use when we talk about this, or are we calling it what it is, and dealing with it and being honest and upfront about it can actually help cut to the core of the issue?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, just to note, when we put names to toxic employees, we were having fun with that. I would not suggest you sit down across from Debbie Downer and say, by the way, everybody here calls you Debbie Downer. Did you know that? Knock it off. So those were just fun, tongue-in-cheek things. Now, if we were to thinking about these employees as toxic employees, I do think that that's a very important word to use. And I think it's important to recognize that they are affecting. A toxic workplace can have not only chemicals in carpets that need to be cleaned, but those people are creating an unhealthy atmosphere where conversations are happening on the side, where people are stressed and disengaged at work. That's huge. That's huge. So if those employees are making people feel worse after they've interacted with them than better, that's a problem. And it does need to be cleaned up. And maybe we do need to don some hazmat suits. I love that. And we would suggest they're orange hazmat suits. But, hey, that's just because that's our favorite color. So oftentimes they can infect silos as well. So we may not have a full toxic employee, creating a ripple effect across an entire organization, but there could be little pockets of it where a work team is being affected by it. I had an example where I worked with a toxic employee, and this person was supposed to be the support person for this management team. And this person tended to say things when you asked her to do things that were clearly in her job description. She'd sigh, roll her eyes, and say, "It'll cost you. It'll cost you." And we just finally stopped using this employee. We stopped going to her because it cost us more stress to ask her to do something and to have her potentially get it wrong when she did than to just do it ourselves. And so all of a sudden, this employee had all this free time on their hands, and they started volunteering for things in the organization and getting awards. And if you've ever seen a group of managers be mad when somebody's been given a service award for volunteering, you should have been in the room and seen my team roll their eyes and be, grr, with their clenched fists as we watched that happen, because we knew she had lots of time to do charity work because she wasn't doing her job. What's the next question?
Thanks for that anecdote, Amy. I know we've all sort of been there. So here's a great point from Janelle, and I think this is in relation to having these conversations and confronting someone that is a toxic employee. How tricky is it to avoid bringing in, hearsay and secondhand information to the conversation? Should you really just stick to, firsthand encounters and evidence that is reinforced between the manager and the employee, or how do you avoid getting into like territory of being gossipy or hearsay?
Great question, Janelle. I really appreciate that. I think whenever possible, if you've seen it, say it. So if it's your own experience, you should start there, because that is your eyewitness or personal experience with it. And at the same time, that may be why the statistic we found with the organization not addressing toxic employees is because I think as a leader, I haven't seen it, so I really can't say it. One of my people on my team told me that this person did this thing, but then I'm going to be telling on them to address it. And I think if you've got a problem on your team and you are the leader of the team, you have an obligation to address this, whether you eyewitness saw it or not. I would get curious. I'd ask more questions of the person. And oftentimes, though, we have an instinct. We often need to just simply obey that instinct and say, you know what? This is not the first time I've heard this. I'm getting a sense that there's something here. So confronting doesn't mean we're accusing. It means we go in and say, here's what I've learned. So if I have a person on my team who I hold in high regard, who has never given me any reason to doubt that they're telling half-truths or lies, well, then I should really be saying, hey, you know what? I learned from one of your team members that this took place, and address it. And get curious about it. If they have a different perspective, then be curious about that too and explore it. So it's not about attacking. So even though the word confrontation sounds like we're attacking, we really want you to think about it as exploring. I want to be with you trying to explore this, rather than saying toxic employee is bad, all other employees are good, and I'm here to attack you. I really want to go in and be curious and find out what's going on. I mean, I may learn something that totally enlightens the situation and allows me to help this toxic employee turn things around for themselves. I hope that addressed your question, Janelle. Thank you for that. That was good.
Here's another one.
Another question?
Yeah, this one's good. This one's from Travis, and I think it's a different spin on the question. So maybe some of us on the call might find ourselves in the other side of the coin as being labeled perhaps or having some toxic behavior. So Travis's question is, given that it's easier for most of us to give rather than receive feedback, do you have any tips on how to receive feedback if you might be in one of these conversations on the other side of the table?
Yeah, that's great. So, Travis, thank you for that question. You know, and just to clarify an earlier question, I wouldn't go into this confrontation conversation and call them a toxic employee. I want you to recognize that. I might say this behavior is having X effect on the team and describe how that behavior is affecting the team. So if I'm on the receiving end, and I think I love your insight, Travis, because boy, we probably have all been there ourselves, driven somebody absolutely insane, had them feel like our interactions with them is creating a negative, toxic interaction with them. And so how do we receive feedback? So part of it is to ask yourself, you know, how am I being given feedback? So what's their tone of voice? Are they being specific? Sometimes we get feedback and it's very unclear exactly what that person is going for. So asking questions of it and saying, you know, help me understand when you say that I did X, can you give me an example of that? So sometimes when we're being given feedback that tends to hurt or impact us in a negative way, or that we feel very defensive about or feel like we've been attacked through that feedback. Sometimes it's choice of words. Sometimes it's tone of voice that the person's giving it to us. And I try to, when I'm on the receiving end of tough feedback, I try to say, what can I learn here? What can I learn here? And is this the first time I've heard this? So this is the part that I think drives everybody else crazy about the toxic employees, that we all know we've tried to have this conversation numerous times, and for whatever reason, this person is in complete denial that this is a problem. And they're not changing. They're not making a behavior change, and it has an impact on how we interact with them. But the question I would ask myself on the receiving end is there anything I can learn here? And if this person's not being clear, how do I ask for more specifics? Ask for examples. And I have to tell you, if you don't get an example, then I would call, on that feedback. If a person has feedback to give me, they darn well better have an example of where I've interacted like that, or to me, it's just going to look like a bad mood looking for a place to land, and I might say, toxic back on ya.
Okay.
We have time for another question.
Yeah, we have time for one last question. I'll try to wrap kind of two concepts into one question here, and I apologize, it's a little bit broad, and so we may go a little over, but I think everyone's really interested in this topic. So again, though, I will make a reminder, if you want to follow up with Amy or anyone from Fierce about this, please include your name into the chat box, and that way we'll be able to pass along your contact information to the appropriate party. So all right, so the last bit here is and I apologize for not attributing the right name to this, but I think a really good concept here is someone saying, do people create an unhealthy environment, or does the culture do that? And then the tag on to that question is, the culture is probably set from leadership. What do you do if the toxic employee that you're wishing to confront is actually your supervisor or the organization's leaders? Is there anything that you can do besides maybe, updating your LinkedIn profile?
I love that. That's great. Well, first of all, I would say, you know what, the culture is not necessarily always created by the leader. Everybody in that culture is the culture. So this is one of the things that if you're complaining about the culture, your complaining is part of the culture. So we are all part of the ecosystem we create, whether it's a healthy ecosystem or an unhealthy ecosystem. And while the leader definitely has a bigger ripple effect in how they interact with people and can definitely impact a culture in a very big way, each and every person in that organization is part of that culture, whether healthy or unhealthy. What we tolerate and put up with creates the culture just as much as what we address and try to clean up can also create a healthier culture. So to answer the second part of that question, I think that if you have a leader who is creating a toxic environment, we encourage you to give that leader feedback and to use the same exact steps in the confrontation model to confront up. And in fact, we have been called in to organizations and worked in big ways with some key organizations across the country, some Fortune 500 companies that have called us because an employee went into the CEO's office and said, I need to talk with you about the effect X is having on my team, and addressing a leader who is a micromanager, addressing a leader who is creating a toxic workplace where they're yelling at people or they're sending mixed messages, where they're drawing a line in the sand one day and then it's moved the next and we don't know where we're going. We often have leaders who say, come clear that with me. And then the next day we go into their office and clear it with them and they say, why are you here? And we're thinking, okay, fine, now I'll work autonomously. And then we start doing that and they're like, why didn't you come to me and ask me that question? So if we're sending crazy mixed messages to our teams, we're driving them insane, and we deserve to be confronted for that. Because if you ask most leaders, they don't want to have a team that's quaking in their boots or in their shoes, worried to come in and speak their truth to that person. So oftentimes, I would confront up. And in some bigger organizations, one of the places you can go if you don't feel comfortable doing that, other than updating your LinkedIn profile and looking for a new job, is to partner with your HR team. So if you're not able to have that conversation directly and you don't feel safe doing that, get some professional help within your organization to say, here's what I'm struggling with, help me. Oftentimes that HR person with some of those leaders is simply trying to gather enough evidence to be able to terminate that leader's employment. That really is true. So the more you go and talk about that, that can help create that file, so to speak, that's needed in order to help that leader find a job where they're happier, where they'll be healthier. So thank you so much. One last thing I wanted to say before we let you go is we're going to be sending out tomorrow a personal integrity scan for all of you, because I think, to Travis's point, we could all be in danger of being that toxic employee, especially in our bad moods or when we're under stress ourselves. We can bark at people or snap. And so, this is an opportunity for you to use a tool that we've created at Fierce to just do a personal integrity scan. Where am I in integrity with myself, and where am I saying one thing and behaving in an opposite way? So thank you. Good luck addressing toxic employees. Please don't be one yourself, and have a great day. Thank you. Thanks, Andrew.
No problem, Amy. Thank you so much. This has been a fantastic presentation. We really appreciate everyone's time on this. So again, I'd like to thank Amy and the team from Fierce Incorporated for this great content. Of course, on behalf of HCI Ben and the rest of the Human Capital Institute webcast team, I would like to extend the biggest thank you of all to each and every one of you, the HCI members who've taken the time out of the day to spend with us today. We absolutely appreciate it and look forward to seeing you on another webcast soon. Enjoy the remainder of the day, everyone, and make it a good one.